Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mike. You guys are rocking with me on Mike's Intellectual Corner. On today's episode, we are going to be diving back into History Matters. This is when did Britain and America stop hating each other and become allies? Without further ado, let's just jump right into it.
It would be an understatement to say that Britain and the USA's relationship got off to a rocky start. In 1812, Britain and America were at war, but just over a century later they were fighting shoulder to shoulder in World War I. Which obviously raises the question, when did Britain and America become allies? There had to be a point where both went from actively disliking each other to working alongside each other. Now, before continuing, it's important to note that even in the immediate aftermath of independence, America and Britain still had strong economic ties. This isn't to say that things
Oh, I'm sure, because I mean, it's kind of hard to just break the type of economic ties that they did have. I mean, obviously, USA was dependent, so I want to not solely, but I want to say at least a good like 60 to 90% of their trade was solely dependent on Britain because obviously they're a colony, so they can't just break that, completely. Which is crazy because obviously we have another war coming up, so.
This isn't to say that things were always great between the two, and there were some pretty major conflicts of interest in the years after the War of 1812 finished. The first, and perhaps the most obvious, was the Monroe Doctrine, established in 1823. This was where the United States, by threat of military intervention, declared an end to any new European colonial adventures in the Americas. And for Britain, this was potentially a problem because it had economic interests in South America. In reality, though, it wasn't too much of a problem at all, because in 1833 it landed a force on the Falkland Islands and America did nothing.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm sure that meant like North America, like not North America, just America. Just, obviously not Canada because they still had Canada, and not South America because if we're being real, like, 19th century, 20th century America didn't really care for the population or anything of South America, but they just cared about the economics, like say Panama and stuff like that of South America. Let's keep going.
Falkland Islands and America did nothing. In 1842, the US did warn Britain against interference in Hawaii, which Britain did heed because America's international power was certainly growing. And it was this fact that America was a rapidly growing great power whose interests could no longer be ignored which would dominate Anglo-American relations for the following century. So the next major event which could have changed the Anglo-American dynamic was the American Civil War, which broke out in 1861. Britain had already abolished slavery at this point, and so you would think that it would have preferred the Union over the
Unfortunately, that cotton sale was too much. You know what I'm saying? They loved that cotton, so and which is understandable. But again, because I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, the British did help out the Confederates in a couple of small little ways. But whenever that was only at the beginning and a little bit in the middle. Once the Emancipation Proclamation came out, then I think they didn't want anything else to do with that because it was a moral stance at that point. So
abolish slavery at this point, and so you would think that it would have preferred the Union over the Confederacy. But you'd be wrong. Now, Britain had no great affection for the Confederacy and its slaveholding practices. Its preferential treatment was purely economic, mostly due to cotton imports. Britain did consider formally recognising the Confederacy, and Anglo-American relations were severely harmed by what's called the Trent Affair. This was where the US government seized a ship with Confederate diplomats headed for Britain, which to Britain looked like the USA telling it who it could and could not speak to. In the end, cooler heads prevailed and Britain didn't get involved, although it did construct a very powerful warship, the CSS Alabama, for the Confederacy. And after the Civil War was over, Britain paid compensation to the United States.
And see, and that's pretty cool too, because I mean, and technically they didn't really have to do that, but it is cool seeing Britain show, apologeticsness to a rebel state that, was obviously trying to undermine America. So it is nice to see that they did that.
Compensation to the United States. Thus, only 50 years away from World War I, Britain and America still didn't really care much for each other. So what changed this? Well, relations actually started to improve during Britain's border dispute with Venezuela in 1895. This developed into somewhat of a crisis, and the US intervened and arbitrated, siding mostly with Britain. For Britain, America had conducted itself in a well-mannered fashion and given Britain most of what it had wanted. And for America, by accepting American arbitration, Britain had yielded its right to influence South America. The other reason for Anglo-American rapprochement was simple: converging interests. America had emerged from its Civil War a more centralized industrial power, and after its defeat of Spain in 1898, it possessed a global empire.
Oh yeah, I'm sure too. The fact that we had our own industrial revolution just upped that ante of trade. You know what I'm saying? From just cotton and stuff like that to a whole gang of stuff like textile, all that stuff just skyrocketed. So and obviously that trade just boom to the point where it actually helped us become the number one economic spot into overtaking Great Britain. And the fact that we helped them out during World War One and that trade and stuff and helping giving them what they needed early on in the beginning of the war, it helped us take over that number one spot essentially. But it helped us out with that alliedness too, because we were helping them out. We were helping them with their war effort, which I'm sure they loved. So
it possessed a global empire too. And for Britain, things were rapidly changing as well. Its empire and global position was being threatened by Russia and the newly formed Germany. Britain had long practiced a policy of isolationism with respect to the European powers, but since they too were industrialising, this had the potential to threaten Britain's position. Thus, her most natural ally seemed to be the United States, since it was half a world away and had its own sphere of influence, plus they spoke the same language and shared many values. It was at the turn of the 20th century under President Theodore Roosevelt that America and Britain really started to become friends, particularly with respect to one foreign policy stance. They didn't like Germany. This agreement allowed for Britain to move its fleet away from its Caribbean colonies back to Britain to defend itself from Germany, while security in the Caribbean would fall to the US. After the First World War broke out, Germany's actions such as
which is kind of funny too, because I wouldn't expect America to be so anti-German in the beginning, because obviously we had a huge German populace, you know what I'm saying? We have a huge freaking world populace, you know what I'm saying? We have a huge Swedish populace, all that stuff, but we also have a huge German populace, so it's kind of weird or kind of funny to see that, President Theodore Roosevelt was so anti-German when I'm sure that wasn't the most popular thing at the time, but yeah. With some of the, obviously some of the populace, but yeah.
The US. After the First World War broke out, Germany's actions such as U-boat attacks on American shipping and the Zimmermann telegram, combined with the fact that if Britain and France lost the war, they wouldn't be able to pay their American loans back, assured US intervention on their side. And from that point onwards, both the US and UK were largely in the same camps, barring a couple of mishaps here and there. I hope you enjoyed.
Yep. So yeah, that's the end of that episode. So yeah, it is kind of funny to think too, is the fact that obviously America couldn't just stay neutral for World War One, because if anything happened and Germany ended up winning, well, we're ass out on all those loans and stuff. So it's kind of funny that inevitably we probably wouldn't have let that happen anyway, just for our own bottom line interests and stuff like that. But again, thank you guys again for joining me on another episode of Micah's Intellectual Corner. Join me on another one. I'll see you guys when I see you. I'm out. Peace.